In this video tutorial, you'll learn how to create new leases and manage tenant information in Property360. I will show you where to find the leases section, how to enter lease details correctly, and share practical tips to help you stay organized. It is important to enter lease information carefully and accurately. Incorrect lease details can lead to issues, creating extra work for yourself later on. We therefore recommend paying close attention to each step and ensuring you understand the process before proceeding. Understanding the lease topic is one of the more difficult parts of trust accounting, so we will spend a lot of time on this topic. Take your time to understand each step. Once you understand how leases work, the rest of the software will be much easier and straightforward to use. To make the lease tutorial easier to follow, this topic has been divided into 3 parts. In Part A, I will cover the basics of creating a new lease. We will focus on lease dates. I will explain why entering the correct end date is important, and show you how to determine the correct start date under different scenarios. In Part B, I will explain what tenant credit is, and walk through examples to help you understand how tenant credit works. I will also explain strategies for optimizing lease expiry dates, how and when to make a lease inactive. In Part C, I will cover lease renewals. You will learn the process for updating a lease when a tenant chooses to renew their lease, as well as how to correct and perform an adjustment to lease dates if you made a mistake. There are 2 ways to access the lease section. You can click the Leases button on the dashboard from the home page, or select Leases from the navigation menu on the left-hand side. Once you enter the lease section, you'll notice the page is organized into 2 sections. The top section displays your active leases, which include tenants currently residing in a property you manage, or have an upcoming tenancy commencing soon. Below this, you'll find your inactive leases. These represent past tenants who have already vacated. This structure helps keep your lease portfolio organized and easy to manage. To create a new lease, simply click the Add Lease button. Begin by selecting the property that is being leased. Next, select the lease term. This selection is only used to calculate the lease end date. Then, select the lease start date. You can press on the calculator button to add the lease term to the start date. This can be used to help you calculate the end date. Please note that lease terms do not need to be strictly 6 or 12 months. It can be 10 months or an arbitrary duration. When selecting an end date, consider seasonal rental demand. For example, avoiding lease expiries during Christmas periods or university holidays may help reduce vacancy risk. In this section, enter the rental price. The bond amount will automatically calculate based on 4 weeks' rent. However, you can manually adjust this if required. The existing tenant credit field will be covered in more detail in the Part B video. Please refer to that section for further guidance on what value should be entered into this field. When entering the lease start date and lease end date, it's important to understand what these dates should be under different scenarios. For the lease end date, it's simple. Always enter the actual end date of the lease agreement. If there is no formal lease agreement, enter the date the tenant has advised they intend to move out on. It is very important to enter an end date. Think of a lease as a bucket that holds a certain amount of water. In this analogy, the water represents rent. When you create a lease and enter an end date, Property360 calculates exactly how much rent is expected for that lease period. In other words, it determines how much rent is required to fill the bucket to 100%. By setting the lease end date, you are also setting a limit on how much rent can be accepted by that lease. This helps prevent accidental overpayments. You might think receiving extra rent is always beneficial. However, in trust accounting, receiving rent beyond the lease period can create additional reconciliation work. For example, imagine a tenant has set up automatic rent payments into the trust account. At the end of the lease, they move out but forget to cancel their automatic rent payments. If you continue receiving the rent and disperse those funds to the owner, the tenant may later request a refund for the overpaid rent. At that point, the money has already been dispersed to the owner, and your management commission may also have been deducted from those rent payments. To refund the tenant, you'll first need to ask the owner to return the money to the trust account before you can process the refund. This creates unnecessary work for both your agency and the owner, and it's a situation that could have been easily avoided. Entering the correct lease end date helps prevent the software from accepting rent overpayments. For example, when the current lease is almost complete, you may receive a rent payment that is more than the remaining rent on the lease. Suppose there is only $600 of rent remaining before the lease reaches 100%, but the tenant accidentally pays $800. The software will not allow you to receipt the full $800 as rent because this would take the lease beyond its 100% limit. Instead, you will need to split the payment into two separate receipts. Enter $600 as rent. This completes the lease and brings it to 100%. Enter $200 as deposit. With a comment, tenant overpayment. The $600 rent receipt, as it is rent, will be included in the management commission calculation, while the $200 deposit will not. You then need to refund the $200 overpayment to the tenant. To do this, enter a payment, with the comment, refund, and then physically transfer the $200 back to the tenant. I will now explain what to enter for the lease start date under different scenarios. Scenario 1. If you have found a brand new tenant, simply enter the actual start date of the lease agreement. This is the date the tenant moves into the property. Scenario 2. If you are taking over management from another property manager, or from an owner who was previously self-managing, the lease start date should be based on the tenants paid up to date. First, determine the date the tenant has already paid rent up to. Then add one day to that date and enter the following day as the lease start date. For example, if the tenant has paid rent up to 17th of March, the lease start date should be 18th of March. Because this is a commonly misunderstood concept, let's go over it again. Please note, the date you take over the management of a property has no impact on the lease start date. What matters is the date the tenant has paid rent up to. This date reflects the tenant's actual rental position. It may be well into the future if the tenant has paid rent in advance, or it may be in the past if the tenant is currently in arrears. Whatever the date is, simply add one day to it. This ensures the new lease starts from the correct date and prevents rent from being recorded twice for the same period. The same rule applies when switching from another trust accounting software system. Determine the tenants paid up to date, add one day, and use that date as the lease start date. Continue entering the tenant details. It is recommended to add the primary contact tenant as the first tenant listed on the lease. Their mobile number will be displayed on the dashboard for quick reference. Some fields, such as date of birth and pet details, are optional. These fields are provided for note-taking purposes only, so you can leave them blank if the information is not required. The tenant email address entered here will be used as the email address for sending PDF receipts and invoices related to this tenancy. The Notes sections can be used to jot down anything extra you want to remember about each tenant. This field is for internal use only and is private, meaning these notes are not visible to the tenant. Finally, set up the new lease letting fee. Consider whether a letting fee should also be charged to the owner. If applicable, select the correct letting fee amount. This amount will be automatically applied when you process the tenant's first rent receipt later on. However, you can still review and modify the fee amount before finalizing the entry. Normally, property managers charge 1 week's rent plus GST for the service of advertising the property, conducting inspections, finding suitable tenants, and securing the tenancy. If this is a brand new tenant, select 100% of 1 week's rent. This would charge the owner 1 week's rental price plus GST as the letting fee. Some property managers may charge a fixed letting fee amount instead. Each business is different. If this applies to your business, select 0% and manually enter the letting fee amount through the Expenses section of the website. If you are taking over management from another property manager, also select 0%. As your agency did not secure the tenant, the letting fee should not be applied. Do not select 100%, as the previous property manager would have already charged the owner a letting fee when they originally secured the tenant. Selecting 100% in this situation would result in the owner being charged a letting fee for a service that your agency did not provide, which may create an unnecessary dispute. Once all lease details have been entered, click Save to create the lease. If you have a large number of leases, the active search function can help you quickly narrow down the list and find the tenants you are looking for. This completes the basic lease setup process. To fully understand the lease section, please continue with Part B and Part C, where I will cover additional content on leases. The lease section is a critical part of trust accounting, so we strongly recommend taking the time to review all three parts carefully to build a solid understanding of the process before adding your first lease. A short quiz is available to reinforce the key points on adding leases. The quiz is designed to reinforce the key concepts and help ensure you are confident creating leases correctly.